He didn't just ask for a divorce. He erased her. On a rain-slicked Tuesday night, Beau Thatcher, the King of Wall Street, handed his 5 months pregnant wife a single black trash bag containing the few items she'd brought into their marriage. He told her the locks were changed, her credit cards were cancelled, and the ironclad prenuptial agreement she'd signed in a haze of love meant she would get nothing. Not a dollar, not a friend, not even a photo of the life she thought was hers. Cast out onto the cold streets of New York, Hattie Thatcher had lost everything. But what Beau didn't know was that in taking everything from her, he had given her the one thing she never had, in their gilded cage, a reason to fight. And she wasn't just going to hire a lawyer. She was going to hire the one lawyer titans like him had nightmares about. This isn't a story of a breakup. It's the story of a demolition. The first year of their marriage was a masterpiece of illusion. Hattie Vance, a bright art history graduate with a kind heart and a background that was comfortable but a world away from unimaginable wealth, had met Beau Thatcher at a Sotheby's auction. He wasn't just another man in a bespoke suit. He had a gravitational pull, a way of focusing his entire attention on her, that made the crowded room disappear. He spoke of art, with passion, of business, with a predator's glee, and of her with a reverence that felt like worship. Beau was a titan of private equity, the founder of Thatcher Holdings, a name that made markets tremble. He was a self-made billionaire, a narrative he polished as brightly as the chrome on his Bugatti. He lived in a sprawling 8,000-square-foot penthouse on Park Avenue that felt less like a home and more like a modern art museum, cool, pristine, and untouchable. The views of Central Park were breathtaking, but the floor-to-ceiling windows always seemed to hold the city at a sterile distance. Their courtship was a whirlwind. Helicopter rides to the Hamptons for lunch, private viewings at the MoMA, after hours a surprise trip to Paris, where he proposed on a private yacht gliding down the Seine, the Eiffel Tower glittering in the background. Hattie, who had always been pragmatic, found herself swept away. She was in love not with the money, but with the man she thought he was, brilliant, attentive, and utterly devoted. Her friends were dazzled, her family relieved that she had found someone who seemed to adore. Adore so completely. He insisted on a prenuptial agreement. A formality, my love, he'd said, his thumb stroking her cheek. My board of directors, the investors. They need to know the company is secure. It has nothing to do with you and me. You and I are forever. He'd brought in his own lawyer, a sleek, silver-haired man named Mr. Abernathy, who explained the complex document in soothing, vague terms. Hattie's own lawyer, a small-town family friend, had advised caution, pointing out that the agreement was unusually restrictive. But Beau had looked at her with those bottomless blue eyes, hurt flickering in their depths. Do you not trust me, Ellie? And so, wanting to prove her trust, her love, and her belief that she wasn't one of those women, she signed it. The wedding was an event chronicled in Vogue, 1,000 guests at the New York Public Library, a dress by a designer she couldn't pronounce, and a 10-foot cake. She became Mrs. Hattie Thatcher, and in doing so, Hattie Vance began to disappear. The first changes were subtle. Beau loved having her host his lavish dinner parties, but he would critique her performance afterward. You were wonderful, darling, but you spent a little too much time talking to the senator's wife. Your focus should always be on the most influential person in the room. He encouraged her to quit her junior curator position at the Guggenheim. Why work for them when you can be a patron? We can build our own collection. Your collection. He framed it as a gift, an elevation of her status. In reality, it was the first step in her isolation. Her old friends, with their normal jobs and normal problems, began to feel out of place in her new life. Lunches became harder to schedule. Beau would often arrange a last-minute trip or an important event she had to attend. "They don't really understand our life, do they?" he'd say gently. "It's not their fault. It's a different world." Soon her world consisted only of him, his business associates, and the silent, ever-present household staff who moved like ghosts through their marble palace. The gilded cage was beautiful. It was filled with couture fine art and every imaginable luxury. But the door was locked from the outside. Beau's moods were the weather system of their home. When he was pleased, the sun shone brightly. When he was displeased, a frigid storm would descend, filled with cutting remarks, dismissive silences, and a psychological chill that was more terrifying than any shouting. He never raised his voice. He didn't have to. He could dismantle her confidence with a single disappointed sigh. "I thought you were smarter than that, Ellie. That dress is a bit simple for the occasion. Don't you think? You seem tired. Are you letting yourself go?" He was a master of gaslighting. If she expressed unhappiness, he would twist it into a failing on her part. "You have everything a woman could ever want. To be unhappy is frankly ungrateful. Perhaps you're just not suited for this kind of life." Then 6 months ago, Hattie found out she was pregnant. For a fleeting moment, she felt a surge of pure, unadulterated joy. A baby. A piece of her, a person to love unconditionally, someone who would be hers in this life that felt so borrowed. When she told Beau, placing the positive pregnancy test on his desk, his reaction was not what she expected. There was no tender embrace, no joyful tears. He looked at the test, then at her, and a slow, triumphant smile spread across his face. It wasn't the smile of a happy father-to-be. It was the smile of a CEO who had just closed a major deal. "A son," he said, a statement, not a question. "He will be my heir. This solidifies everything." He saw the baby not as their child, but as his legacy. From that moment, Hattie's pregnancy became another asset to be managed. He hired a team of nutritionists, doctors, and a prenatal specialist who reported directly to him. Her diet was monitored. Her exercise was scheduled. Her life was no longer her own in any respect. The pregnancy, she realized with a dawning horror, had not been a key to her freedom, but the final lock on her cage. She wasn't carrying their child. She was carrying his heir, and the vessel he believed was entirely disposable. The 5 months of her pregnancy were a slow-motion nightmare. Beau's control, once a velvet glove, was now an iron fist. The illusion of partnership was gone, replaced by the stark reality of ownership. He talked about the baby as if she were merely an incubator, a biological necessity he was forced to tolerate. "The doctor said you need to avoid all processed sugars. The chef will prepare your meals accordingly." He'd announce, not discuss. "I've arranged for prenatal yoga and a meditation coach to come to the penthouse. There is no need for you to be out in public." He vetoed all of her name suggestions. Thomas was too common. Oliver was too soft. He had already decided on Beau Thatcher Tuku, a testament not to family tradition, but to his own staggering ego. When she tried to argue, to plead for a small piece of this experience to be hers, his response was cold and swift. "Hattie, your job is to remain calm and healthy for my son. Do not introduce stress into this environment with these sentimental theatrics. Your emotional whims are a liability." The loneliness was a physical ache. Her days were empty, punctuated only by appointments he had scheduled. She would walk through the cavernous apartment, her hand on her growing belly, feeling like a ghost haunting her own life. The art on the walls, once a source of joy, now seemed to mock her with its silent, static beauty. She was just another object in Beau Thatcher's collection. The turning point, the first crack that would shatter the entire facade, came from an innocuous piece of mail. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope addressed to Beau from a law firm she didn't recognize, Blackwood and Finch. It had been accidentally placed in a small pile of personal correspondence on her vanity, instead of being whisked away to Beau's study. Her curiosity was piqued. Beau's corporate legal matters were handled by a massive firm, and his personal matters by the slick Mr. Abernathy. This was different. Her hands trembled as she debated what to do. For a year, she had been conditioned to respect Beau's privacy, which was in reality total secrecy. To open his mail was a cardinal sin. But something a flicker of the old independent Hattie Vance urged her on. With her heart pounding, she carefully steamed the envelope open over a kettle in her cavernous bathroom. The letter was from a family law attorney. It wasn't about a corporate merger or a real estate deal. It was a detailed summary of a settlement, a divorce settlement. But the names were not Hattie and Beau Thatcher. The names were Beau Thatcher and a woman named Catherine DeWitt. The documents were dated 18 months ago, just before Hattie had met him. Her blood ran cold. He had told her he'd had one long-term relationship in his 20s that had ended amicably years ago. He had painted himself as a man too dedicated to his work to have time for messy entanglements. This was not an amicable split. The settlement was brutal. It described a prenuptial agreement, identical to hers. It detailed how Miss DeWitt was to be stripped of everything, how she was to sign a non-disclosure agreement so stringent it would bankrupt her if she ever even mentioned Beau's name. It spoke of her being escorted from their shared property with only her personal effects. But the most chilling part was a small handwritten note from the lawyer stapled to the top page. It read, "Beau, a final confirmation that the PI surveillance found no evidence of infidelity. So we proceeded with the standard irreconcilable differences clause. The asset protection strategy worked flawlessly. She's gone. Congratulations on a clean exit." Hattie sank onto the cold marble floor, the letter shaking in her hand. It wasn't just that he had been married before. It was the pattern, the ruthless, systematic dismantling of a woman's life. The prenup, the isolation, the eventual disposal. He hadn't married Catherine DeWitt. He had acquired and liquidated her. And now Hattie was next. She saw it all with horrifying clarity. The prenup she'd signed in good faith was not a formality. It was a weapon waiting to be used. His isolation of her wasn't an accidental byproduct of their lifestyle. It was a deliberate strategy. He was ensuring that when the time came to cast her aside, she would have no support system, no resources, no one to turn to. Why had he married her? For a beautiful hostess, for the image of a stable family man, to impress his old money investors. And the baby. Oh God, the baby. The baby was the ultimate prize. With an heir, he had everything he needed from her. She had served her purpose. The clean exit mentioned in the note echoed in her mind. He had done this before. He was an expert at it. She was living a nightmare that another woman had already endured. How many others had there been? A cold fury, an emotion she hadn't felt in years, began to burn through her shock and fear. The passive, pleasing wife began to recede, and in her place, a terrified but determined woman began to emerge. He had made a grave miscalculation. He thought she was just another beautiful object, too dazzled by his wealth and power to see the truth. He had underestimated her. He had mistaken her kindness for weakness. She carefully resealed the envelope and placed it back where she found it. She spent the rest of the day in a state of hyper-alertness, observing him, seeing him for the first time for what he truly was, a predator. His compliments sounded like threats, his smiles like warnings. That evening she decided to test her theory. She needed to know how he would react. Over dinner, a silent, tense affair. She put down her fork and looked at him. "Beau," she began, her voice steadier than she expected. "I was thinking, after the baby is born, I'd love to go back to work, perhaps part-time, or maybe start a small art consultancy firm. Something for myself." Beau stopped chewing. He placed his knife and fork down with deliberate precision, the clink of silver on porcelain echoing in the silent room. He dabbed his lips with a napkin, his eyes never leaving hers. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "For yourself." He repeated the word, soft and laced with ice. "You have a home. You have a staff. You will have a son. Isn't that enough?" "It's not about that," she said, pressing on. "It's about having a sense of identity, of purpose, outside of me," he finished. His face was a placid mask, but his eyes were blazing. "You stand here in a home I provided, wearing clothes I paid for, carrying my child, and you tell me it's not enough. This is exactly the kind of emotional instability I was worried about. It's detrimental to the pregnancy." "It's not instability, Beau. It's a perfectly normal desire." "It is a betrayal," he hissed, the mask finally cracking. "It shows a lack of gratitude and a profound misunderstanding of your role. Your purpose is here. Your identity is Ms. Beau Thatcher. Do you understand me?" She stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't respond. She just held his cold, furious gaze. In her silence, he saw not submission, but defiance. And that sealed her fate. The confrontation over her desire to work marked the beginning of the end. The final week was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Beau became icily polite, a benevolent captor who had already decided on the prisoner's execution date. He watched her every move. Conversations were stilted and superficial. The air in the penthouse was thick with unspoken threats. Hattie knew he was planning something. The letter from Blackwood and Finch was her Rosetta Stone, allowing her to translate his actions. He was preparing for another clean exit. She started making her own quiet preparations. She used the cash from her weekly household allowance, a pittance he gave her for personal items, to buy a burner phone and a prepaid debit card. She methodically went through her belongings, identifying the few things that were truly hers. Before the marriage, some well-loved books, a locket from her grandmother, a portfolio of her university art history papers. They were meager treasures in a sea of opulent nothingness. She packed them into a small tote bag she hid at the back of her closet, a pathetic little lifeboat in an ocean of his possessions. The final night came without warning. It was a Tuesday. It was raining, the water streaking down the vast windows like prison bars. Beau had been out all day for a series of meetings. He came home just after 9, his trench coat damp, his face unreadable. Hattie was in the living room, trying to read, but the words swam before her eyes. Her hand rested protectively on her belly, a constant gesture now. The baby was the only thing that felt real. He didn't greet her. He walked to the bar, poured himself a Macallan 25, and downed it in one go. He then turned to her, his eyes as cold and grey as the stormy sky outside. "Pack a bag," he said. Hattie's blood turned to ice. "What are you talking about, Bo?" "I think you heard me," he said, his voice devoid of all emotion. "You are leaving tonight." She stood up slowly, her body trembling. "You can't be serious. I'm 5 months pregnant with your child." "You are 5 months pregnant with my son," he corrected her, his voice slicing through the air. "An heir I will now have to raise alone, thanks to your deceit." "My deceit?" she whispered, her mind reeling. He walked over to his desk and picked up a slim manila folder. He tossed it onto the marble coffee table. It slid to a stop in front of her. "My security team is very thorough, Hattie. I have them check on everyone in my life. Everyone." She opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were photographs, grainy, long-lens shots of her having coffee a week ago with a man. The man was Mark, her cousin, who had been in town for a conference. They had met for an hour at a cafe near his hotel. The photos were taken from an angle that made their hug look intimate, their conversation conspiratorial. "Who is he?" Bo demanded, his voice a low growl. "That's my cousin Mark," she said, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and outrage. "You've met him at our wedding." "A likely story." Bo sneered the performance of the wronged husband, now in full swing. "Our prenuptial agreement, if you recall, has a rather stringent infidelity clause. Any romantic or sexual contact with another man renders the entire contract null and void on your part, and you forfeit any and all claims. My lawyer, Mr. Abernathy, assures me these photos are more than sufficient to prove your betrayal." It was a lie, a monstrous, calculated lie. He knew exactly who Mark was. This wasn't about infidelity. This was his pretext. The excuse he needed for the clean exit. He had learned from the DeWitt divorce. This time, he wouldn't just leave her with nothing, he would brand her as an adulteress on the way out. "You're lying," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "This is insane. You are fabricating this." "Am I?" he said, stepping closer, his presence overwhelming. "Who will they believe, Hattie Bo Thatcher, or a penniless, disgraced woman with a history of emotional instability? I will paint you as a gold digger who tried to trap me, then cheated when you got bored. No one will ever believe you." Tears streamed down her face, tears of anger and utter helplessness. "The baby Bo. Think about our baby." "I am," he said, his voice dropping to a chilling whisper. "I'm protecting him from a corrupting influence. I will get full custody. I will prove you are an unfit mother. You will be lucky if you ever see him." That was the moment her heart truly broke. It wasn't about the money or the penthouse or the life he was snatching away. It was the threat of taking her child. A primal fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her shock. "You won't get away with this," she choked out. He laughed, a short, ugly sound. "I already have. Your credit cards have been cancelled. Your name has been removed from all joint accounts. The household staff have been instructed not to speak to you. Mr. Abernathy has already filed the initial papers. By morning, you will be a ghost." He walked towards the foyer and returned with a single large black plastic trash bag. He threw it at her feet. "This is for your personal effects, the things you came here with. My head of security, a man named Thomas, will escort you to the service elevator. He will give you 5 minutes in the bedroom to gather your things. If you take anything that belongs to me, anything that was purchased during our marriage, I will have you arrested for theft. Do you understand?" She stared at him, this monster she had married, this complete stranger. The love she thought she had for him curdled into pure, unadulterated hatred. Numbly, she walked to the bedroom, the silent security guard, Thomas, following her like a shadow. She didn't look at the priceless art or the designer clothes. She walked straight to the closet, pulled out her hidden tote bag, and then with a surge of defiance, she grabbed the few paperback books and the small locket he had allowed her. She ignored the jewelry, the couture, the empty promises that filled the room. She put her few meager possessions into the black trash bag, a symbol of her utter humiliation. 5 minutes later, she was standing in the service elevator, the cold metal pressing against her back. Thomas, a large man with dead eyes, didn't look at her. The elevator descended not to the grand lobby, but to a dingy concrete loading bay at the back of the building. The doors opened to the rain-slicked alley. The stench of garbage and damp pavement filled her nostrils. Thomas pointed towards the street. "You are no longer permitted on the premises, Mrs. Thatcher." The name felt like a final insult. She wasn't Mrs. Thatcher anymore. She was nothing. He handed her nothing. No cash, no cab fare. Just the trash bag. The heavy service door clicked shut behind her, the sound of the deadbolt sliding into place, echoing in the alley. Hattie stood there for a long moment, the cold rain soaking her thin silk blouse. She was 5 months pregnant, standing in a dark alley on the Upper East Side with a trash bag of her former life and less than $200 on a prepaid debit card. She had been erased. She looked up at the glittering penthouse, a beacon of light high above the city. He was up there in their home, probably pouring another scotch, congratulating himself on another clean exit. A sob escaped her lips, a raw, guttural sound of grief and fury. She sank to her knees on the wet pavement, the trash bag falling beside her. It was over. He had won. He had destroyed her. But as the cold seeped into her bones, another feeling began to smolder beneath the despair. It was the fire she thought he had extinguished, the rage, the injustice. He thought he had left her with nothing. But as she clutched her belly, feeling the faint flutter of life inside, she knew he was wrong. He had left her with a reason to live. He had left her with a reason to fight. He had made the biggest mistake of his life. He had turned a victim into an adversary. And she would not rest until she had taken everything from him. Not his money, but his power, his reputation, his entire world. She would find a way. She would make him pay. The first 48 hours were a blur of survival. Hattie, drenched and shivering, stumbled out of the alley and into the indifferent glare of the city. The glowing windows of Park Avenue townhouses seemed to mock her. She was invisible, a ghost haunting the edges of a world that had just violently ejected her. Her first instinct was to call her parents, but shame and Beau's threat of painting her as an unstable adulteress held her back. How could she explain this? What could they possibly do against a man like Beau Thatcher? She used her burner phone to find the nearest cheap motel, a grimy establishment near the Port Authority bus terminal that smelled of stale cigarettes and despair. The clerk eyed her designer clothes and trash bag with suspicion, but took the cash for one night. The room was a box with a lumpy bed and a flickering fluorescent light. She sat on the edge of the bed for hours, the events of the night playing over and over in her head. The shock began to recede, replaced by waves of terror. He was going to take her baby. That one thought became the focal point of her fear. She barely slept. The next day, she forced herself to eat a bagel from a street cart and found a public library. The prepaid debit card had 187,034s on it. It was her entire net worth. In the quiet, anonymous space of the library, she allowed herself to think. Crying was a luxury she couldn't afford. Panic was an enemy she had to conquer. She knew she needed a lawyer. But how? The kind of lawyer who could fight Beau would cost thousands, tens of thousands just for a retainer. She was legally destitute. Beau had designed it this way. He had built a fortress around himself, and she was on the outside with no weapons. She started her research typing "Top Divorce Lawyers NYC" into the library computer. The names that came up were all from firms that likely had Beau on their client list. Then she tried a different search: lawyers who beat powerful men. One name appeared again and again in articles from the New York Times, Forbes, and legal journals. The name was Seraphina Monroe. The articles depicted a legal legend. Seraphina wasn't just a lawyer. She was a tactician, a warrior. Her firm, Monroe and Associates, was a boutique powerhouse known for taking on impossible cases. She specialized in representing the spouses, almost always women who had been chewed up and spat out by the corporate and financial elite. She had a reputation for being brilliant, relentless, and terrifyingly expensive. Her tagline quoted in one article was, "I don't believe in fighting fair. I believe in winning." Photos showed a woman in her late 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes, severely cut black hair, and a gaze that could dissect a lie from 100 paces. She was everything Hattie needed and nothing she could afford. Desperation, however, is a powerful motivator. Hattie found the address for Monroe and Associates, a discreet but incredibly chic office in the meat-packing district. She knew she couldn't just walk in. She had one shot to get Seraphina's attention. She couldn't look like a victim. She had to look like a case. She spent the next day planning. She used $30 of her precious money to buy a simple, professional-looking second-hand black dress from a thrift store. She ironed it using the steam from the motel room's shower. She pulled her hair back into a severe, elegant bun. She composed herself, channeling every ounce of the poise and confidence that had been drilled into her during her year as Mrs. Thatcher. She had to look like she belonged in that world, even if she had been exiled from it. Her most important preparation was intellectual. She wrote down every single detail she could remember about Beau, not just the emotional abuse, but the business details she'd overheard. Names of partners' offshore accounts. He'd bragged about his obsessive secrecy around certain deals, his paranoia about audits. She remembered the name from the hidden letter, Catherine DeWitt. She wrote it all down in a clear, concise timeline. This was her ammunition. The next morning, she took the subway to the meat-packing district. She walked into the serene, minimalist lobby of Monroe and Associates. The receptionist, a coolly professional young woman, looked up. "Can I help you? I need to see Seraphina Monroe," Hattie said, her voice calm and firm, betraying none of the terror raging inside her. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," Hattie said, "but it's a matter of the utmost urgency. Please tell her that Hattie Thatcher is here. Tell her it's regarding her husband, Beau Thatcher. And tell her I have information about the Catherine DeWitt settlement." The receptionist's practiced indifference wavered for a fraction of a second at the mention of the names. She picked up the phone, her voice a low murmur. A minute later, she hung up. "Ms. Monroe is in a meeting. You can wait, but she may not be available." Hattie nodded and sat down on a sleek leather sofa. She waited. For 1 hour, then 2, then 3. The receptionist occasionally glanced at her, likely expecting her to give up. But Hattie sat perfectly still. her hands folded over her small baby bump, her expression unreadable. She was playing a high-stakes game of chicken. At 1 p.m., a door opened, and Serafina Monroe emerged. She was even more formidable in person. She was wearing a razor-sharp Armani suit, and she walked with a purpose that seemed to bend the air around her. She was talking to a junior associate, not even glancing in Hattie's direction. As she passed, Hattie stood up. "Ms. Monroe." Serafina stopped and turned. Her eyes, as sharp as obsidian shards, swept over Hattie, taking in the cheap dress, the determined face, the slight swell of her stomach. "You're Hattie Thatcher," she said. It wasn't a question. "You have 5 minutes." She led Hattie not into a grand office, but a small, stark meeting room with a glass table. "My time costs $2,500 an hour," Serafina said, sitting down. "You have wasted 3 hours of it in my lobby. This had better be good." Hattie took a deep breath. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. She laid out her story with the cold, factual precision of a legal brief. She described the marriage, the isolation, the pregnancy, and the discovery of the DeWitt letter. She recounted the final brutal night of her expulsion. And then she presented her timeline, her notes on Beau's potential financial secrets. "He believes he has made me destitute," Hattie said, her voice clear and strong. "He believes that because of the prenuptial agreement, I have no legal recourse. He threw me out with a trash bag and believes I will just disappear. He is mistaken." Serafina listened, her face an unreadable mask. She picked up Hattie's notes and scanned them. Her eyes lingered on the name Catherine DeWitt and the mentions of offshore accounts. When Hattie finished, Serafina was silent for a full minute. She tapped a long, manicured finger on the glass table. "The prenup is likely ironclad," she said, her voice crisp. "Beau Thatcher's lawyers are the best in the business. A direct assault would be financial suicide. He knows this. He's counting on it. The infidelity claim is a fabrication, but it's designed to muddy the waters and drain your resources in discovery resources you don't have." Hattie's heart sank. "However," Serafina continued, a dangerous glint in her eye, "you have given me something more valuable than a legal claim. You've given me leverage." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city. "Men like Beau Thatcher have 2 weaknesses, their ego and their secrets. He believes he is untouchable. His ego is his shield, but his secrets are the cracks in his armor. The DeWitt case proves a pattern of behavior. The financial details you've recalled, they suggest he's not just ruthless in his personal life. He's probably careless in his business. Men who crave that much control always make mistakes." She turned back to Hattie. "This won't be a divorce case. A divorce case is a battle. I prefer to wage war. We won't be fighting over the scraps from his table based on your prenup. We will be coming for the table itself." "I can't pay you," Hattie whispered, the one insurmountable fact. Serafina gave a thin, wolfish smile. "Oh, I'm not worried about my fee. I'll be taking this case on contingency. A rather large contingency. Let's call it 35% of whatever we recover. And we will recover." She extended a hand. "I find men like your husband profoundly boring in their cruelty. It's a genuine pleasure to dismantle them. Do we have a deal, Mrs. Thatcher?" Hattie looked at the outstretched hand of the most feared lawyer in New York. It was a lifeline. It was a declaration of war. She put her hand in Serafina's and shook it firmly. "Yes," Hattie said, a surge of power flowing through her. "We have a deal." "Good," Serafina said, her smile widening slightly. "Now let's go get your life back." And while we're at it, let's burn his to the ground." Seraphina Monroe did not move like a lawyer. She moved like a general marshalling her forces for a blitzkrieg. Within hours of their handshake, Hattie was moved from the seedy motel to a secure, upscale corporate apartment in a discreet building in Battery Park City, the lease paid for by the firm. It was clean, anonymous, and safe. A line of credit was opened in her name, funded by the firm for living expenses. "You are now an investment, Hattie," Seraphina told her. "We protect our investments." The war room was Seraphina's office. A glass wall was converted into a whiteboard, quickly covered in a complex web of names, dates, and corporate structures. Beau Thatcher was at the center, a spider in his web. "We don't fire a shot until the cannons are in place," Seraphina instructed her team of hungry young associates and a grizzled, coffee-addicted forensic accountant named Sal. "Beau thinks this is a domestic dispute. He's expecting a tearful letter from a family lawyer. He's not expecting an audit from hell." Their first move was silent and subterranean. Seraphina's team didn't file for divorce. They didn't contest the pre-enup. They started digging. The first target was Catherine DeWitt. Finding her was difficult. She had all but vanished after her divorce, her name scrubbed from public records by Beau's legal team. But Seraphina had a private investigator on retainer, a former NYPD detective named Diaz, who specialized in finding people who didn't want to be found. After a week, Diaz found her. Catherine was living a quiet, fearful life in a small town in Oregon, working as a librarian under her maiden name. Seraphina and Hattie flew to Portland. They met Catherine in a quiet park. At first, she was terrified, the NDA she'd signed looming over her like a guillotine. "I can't talk to you," she said, her hands trembling. "He'll destroy me. You don't know what he's capable of." "Oh, I think I do," Hattie said softly, her hand resting on her own belly. "He did it to you, and then he did it to me. And now I am pregnant with his child. He's going to do it again unless we stop him." Seeing Hattie, seeing her own past, reflected in another woman's eyes, seeing the pregnancy that might have been hers, broke through Catherine's fear. Seraphina calmly explained that the duress under which she signed the NDA, combined with Beau's potential fraudulent activities, could render it unenforceable. "We will protect you, Catherine. We will indemnify you against any legal action he takes." Hesitantly at first, then in a flood of cathartic release, Catherine told her story. It was identical to Hattie's, the whirlwind romance, the isolation, the control, the fabricated infidelity, the brutal expulsion. But Catherine provided a crucial piece of the puzzle. "He had a partner in his first big fund," she explained. "A man named Marcus Thorne. They were brilliant together. But Beau cut him out right before the fund matured using some legal loophole to dilute his shares to nothing. Marcus threatened to sue, said Beau was cooking the books. Beau paid him a small settlement to go away. But I know Marcus got screwed. Beau was terrified of him." Marcus Thorne. The name went up on the whiteboard. While Diaz looked for Marcus Thorne, Sal, the forensic accountant, began his deep dive. Using the scraps of information Hattie had provided, he started tracing the flow of money from Thatcher Holdings. It was a labyrinth of shell corporations, offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Liechtenstein, and convoluted transactions designed to obscure and conceal. "This isn't just aggressive accounting," Sal said, after 2 weeks of sleepless nights pointing to a complex diagram on the board. "This is straight-up fraud. He's using new investor money to pay inflated returns to his initial investors to keep the illusion of success going. It's a classic Ponzi scheme, just dressed up in a private equity suit." He's been hiding massive losses in a real estate development project by funneling money through these offshore entities. If one of his major investors ever decides to pull out, the whole house of cards will collapse. This was the bombshell. This was the weapon of mass destruction. It was no longer about divorce court. This was a federal crime. Beau, meanwhile, was getting impatient. He had heard nothing from Hattie. His lawyers had sent perfunctory letters to her parents' home, which were returned unopened. She had vanished. This was not part of his plan. He wanted her to be destitute and desperate, begging for scraps. Her silence was unnerving. He had his security team try to find her, but the corporate apartment was a ghost registered to a shell company owned by Monroe and Associates. He grew cocky. He started making public appearances with a Russian model on his arm, cementing his narrative that he was the wronged husband moving on from his unfaithful wife. He leaked stories to the tabloids about Hattie's erratic behavior and questionable friendships. Serafina watched all of this with a predator's patience. "He's overplaying his hand," she said with a grim smile. "He's creating a public record of his own arrogance. Let him." Finally, Diaz found Marcus Thorne. He was living in Florida, running a small charter fishing business, a bitter and broken man. Serafina and Hattie flew down to meet him. He was tough, cynical, and wanted nothing to do with Beau Thatcher. "That man ruined my life," he growled. "I'm not getting back in the mud with him." "He didn't just ruin your life, Mr. Thorne," Hattie said, looking him in the eye. "He's built an empire on a foundation of lies that started with you, and now he's trying to take my child." Serafina laid out their case. She showed him Sal's preliminary findings on the fraud. "We believe the evidence of the fraud he's committing now is hidden in the same offshore accounts he used to hide the money he stole from you. If you help us, we can expose him. You might not get your money back, but you will get justice. And we can structure a settlement for you out of our eventual recovery." Thorne was quiet for a long time, looking out at the ocean. "He always called me a sore loser," he said finally. "He told everyone I was incompetent. He destroyed my reputation." The thought of vindication, of seeing Beau's perfect world burn, was a powerful lure. "All right," he said, turning back to them, his eyes hard. "I'm in. I have documents, records of the original fund he thought I'd destroyed. They'll prove my case. They'll establish his pattern." The final pieces were in place. They had the narrative from Catherine DeWitt. They had the financial evidence from Sal. And now they had a key witness from Beau's past who could corroborate the foundation of his fraudulent empire. Serafina Monroe sat back in her office chair. "Okay," she said, a chilling smile on her face. "The cannons are in place. It's time to fire the first shot." She picked up the phone and dialed Mr. Abernathy, Beau's lawyer. "Mr. Abernathy," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "This is Serafina Monroe. I'm representing Hattie Thatcher. I think it's time we had a conversation. Not about the divorce. Let's talk about the SEC, the Southern District of New York, and a man named Marcus Thorne." Across the city in his penthouse, Beau Thatcher's world was about to come to a screeching halt. The war had begun. The silence on the other end of the phone was more eloquent than any words. Serafina could almost hear the blood draining from Mr. Abernathy's face. Beau's carefully constructed world had just been hit by a bunker-busting bomb. Abernathy, a man used to bullying and bluster, was suddenly stammering. "I'm not sure what you're referring to." "Oh, I think you do," Serafina purred. "Let's cut the theatrics. My client, Hattie Thatcher, has been subjected to a campaign of malicious lies and has been illegally dispossessed of her marital home. But that's a sideshow. The main event is Thatcher Holdings. We have, let's call it a compelling body of evidence, including sworn testimony from Marcus Thorne and Catherine DeWitt, and a forensic analysis that paints a rather bleak picture of your client's compliance with federal securities law. We were about to package this all up for the SEC, but I thought I'd give you the professional courtesy of a call first. It was a declaration of total war. Serafina wasn't suing for divorce alimony. She was holding a financial nuke, and her finger was on the button. A meeting was scheduled for the following day at Serafina's office. It was neutral ground she controlled. Bo arrived flanked by Abernathy and a team of corporate lawyers. He was still radiating arrogance, but for the first time Hattie could see a flicker of panic in his eyes. He looked at Hattie, who was seated next to Serafina, as if she were a piece of furniture that had inexplicably started talking. He refused to address her directly, speaking only to Serafina. "What is this nonsense? My wife is clearly unstable and has filled your head with fantasies. We have an ironclad prenuptial agreement." "We're not here to discuss the prenup, Bo," Serafina said, sliding a single sheet of paper across the table. "We're here to discuss this." It was a summary of Sal's findings, a one-page roadmap to the ruin of Thatcher Holdings, highlighting the fraudulent transfers, the offshore entities, and the estimated $200 million hole in his latest fund. Bo's face went pale. Abernathy snatched the paper, and his legal team huddled, whispering frantically. "This is an outrage!" Bo blustered, his voice a little too loud. "This is slander. I'll sue you into oblivion." "You could try," Serafina said calmly. "But a lawsuit involves discovery, and I can't imagine you want us deposing your fund managers under oath, or Mr. Thorne, or handing our evidence over to the U.S. Attorney's Office. They tend to take Ponzi schemes very seriously." Hattie watched him, this man who had seemed like a god to her. For the first time she saw him as he was small, terrified, and utterly cornered. He had built his kingdom on fear, but now fear was his enemy. "What do you want?" He finally spat out the words, tasting like poison in his mouth. "My client has a few simple non-negotiable terms," Serafina said, her voice like ice. She laid them out. First, the prenuptial agreement was to be torn up. It would be replaced by a new post-nuptial settlement. Hattie would receive a one-time lump sum payment of $50 million, transferred within 24 hours. Bo scoffed. "That's absurd." "Is it?" Serafina countered. "It's a fraction of what the government will seize and the fines they'll levy when they find out you've been running a criminal enterprise. Consider it a bargain." Second, the Park Avenue penthouse was to be transferred into a trust for their unborn child, with Hattie as the sole trustee. Bo was to vacate the property immediately. Third, Bo would agree to sole legal and physical custody of the child for Hattie. He would be granted supervised visitation rights 4 times a year at Hattie's discretion. There would be no Bo Thatcher Too. The child's name would be chosen by Hattie alone. Fourth, a gag order would be imposed on him. He would never speak of Hattie or their child publicly or privately. Any violation would result in a $10 million penalty. And finally, the fabricated infidelity claim was to be publicly and formally retracted in a letter from his lawyer, stating that the allegation was made in error and based on false information. Bo stared at her, his face a mask of incandescent rage. He was being systematically dismantled, stripped of his home, his heir, his money, and his power. The architect of the clean exit was now the subject of one. "This is extortion," he yelled, slamming his hand on the table. Hattie spoke for the first time, her voice quiet but ringing with steel. "No, Bo. This is a reckoning. You tried to erase me. You threatened to take my son. You left me on the street with nothing but a trash bag. This isn't extortion. This is the price of your cruelty." He looked at her, then truly looked at her, and saw not the pliable girl he had married, but the avenging woman she had become. He saw Seraphina Monroe's cold, unwavering gaze. He saw the faces of his lawyers, who were no longer looking at him with deference, but with a new calculating fear for their own professional exposure. He saw the abyss opening up beneath him, the SEC, federal prison, the complete collapse of his name and his company. He was trapped, and he knew it. The fight went out of him, replaced by the hollow shell of defeat. "Draw up the papers," he mumbled to Abernathy, not looking at anyone. The next few days were a blur of legal activity. The settlement was signed. The $50 million appeared in an account Seraphina had set up for Hattie. The deed to the penthouse was transferred. The letter of retraction was issued. Beau Thatcher, the King of Wall Street, moved out of his palace via the service elevator, his belongings carted away in boxes. The story, as Seraphina had predicted, eventually broke. Not from them, but from within Thatcher Holdings. Once word of the massive, sudden settlement got out, nervous investors started asking questions. One of the major ones, a pension fund, demanded an audit. The House of Cards collapsed. The SEC launched a formal investigation. The U.S. Attorney's Office convened a grand jury. Marcus Thorne and other partners Beau had burned came out of the woodwork. The tabloids that had once smeared Hattie were now feasting on Beau's carcass, printing headlines like "Thatcher's Kingdom of Lies" and "Park Avenue Ponzi." He was ruined. His reputation was shattered, his company was dismantled, and he was facing years of litigation and likely prison time. He was destroyed not by a messy divorce, but by the weight of his own hubris and deceit, a weight Hattie had simply given the final push. 3 months later, Hattie stood in the vast living room of the Park Avenue penthouse. It was hers now, but it felt different. The cold, sterile art was gone, replaced by warmer, more personal pieces she had chosen. The silence was no longer oppressive. It was peaceful. She walked to the great window and looked out over Central Park, her hand on her now very prominent belly. She felt a kick, a strong, reassuring flutter of the new life growing inside her. A life she had fought for. She was no longer Hattie Vance, the naive art student, nor was she Hattie Thatcher, the billionaire's decorative wife. She was just Hattie, a mother-to-be, a survivor, a woman who had walked through fire and emerged not burned but forged. She had lost everything only to gain back the one thing that mattered herself. She had faced the monster and won not by becoming a monster herself, but by finding a strength she never knew she had. Her son would be born into freedom, his future secured, his mother whole and unbowed. The king was dead. Long live the queen. In the end, Hattie's victory wasn't measured in the $50 million or the Park Avenue penthouse. It was measured in her freedom. She took the power a cruel man tried to wield against her and used it to reclaim her life and protect her child. Her story is a powerful reminder that the deepest betrayals can often ignite the fiercest strengths within us. Beau Thatcher thought he could erase her, but he only succeeded in making her unforgettable, a testament to the fact that no one, no matter how powerful, is immune to a reckoning. She didn't just win a settlement, she won back her future. If Hattie's journey from a gilded cage to absolute triumph resonated with you, please take a moment to support our channel. Hit the like button below. Share this video with someone who needs to hear a story of strength, and most importantly, subscribe for more true life dramas. Your support allows us to keep telling these incredible stories. Thank you for listening. What happens when the person you promise to love, honor, and cherish dismisses you in front of the world as nothing more than the hired help? For Letitia Hayes, the breaking point came with 6 soul-crushing words. Oh, her. She's just the nanny. In the opulent ballroom of a mansion she called home, her husband Richard cast her aside with a laugh. But what he didn't know, and what their glittering guests could never imagine, was that the true power wasn't in his bank account or his booming voice. It was hidden in a secret folder, in a name signed on a piece of paper that was about to bring his entire world crashing down. This isn't just a story of revenge. It's a story of reclamation. The air in Blackwood Manor always felt borrowed. It was a magnificent estate, a sprawling Tudor revival mansion nestled in the green hills of upstate New York, with stone walls that held the chill of a century and windows that stared out like the eyes of a dormant beast. To the outside world, this was the home of Richard and Letitia Hayes, a testament to his staggering success in the world of finance. But to Letitia it was a gilded cage, and the bars were forged from her husband's expectations. Letitia moved through the great hall, her footsteps silent on the Persian rugs. She wasn't born to this life. She was a librarian's daughter from a quiet town in Pennsylvania, a woman who found more comfort in the hushed aisles of a library than in the echoing grandeur of a ballroom. She had met Richard a decade ago, a whirlwind romance where she, a scholarship student at Columbia, was swept off her feet by the charismatic, ambitious MBA student who promised her the world. He had delivered in a way. He had given her a life of unimaginable luxury, 2 beautiful children, 10-year-old Lily and 6-year-old Leo, and a name that opened doors. But in the process he had whittled away the woman she used to be, replacing her with a polished, silent accessory. Tonight was the annual Hayes Foundation Gala, Richard's crowning social achievement. It wasn't really a charity event. It was a power play, a night where Richard paraded his success in front of rivals, allies, and sycophants. For Letitia, it was an ordeal. For weeks, she had been the unseen engine of the event. She coordinated with the caterers, the florists, the orchestra. She selected the vintage of the champagne and approved the 7-course menu. She did it all from a small, sunlit office that Richard condescendingly called her hobby room, while he took the credit. Letitia, darling. Richard's voice boomed from the top of the grand staircase. He was already in his tuxedo, a masterpiece of tailoring that did little to soften the sharp, predatory lines of his ambition. Is everything in order? The Carringtons will be here any minute. I want this evening to be flawless. Everything is ready. Richard, she replied, her voice calm and even, a skill she had perfected over years of navigating his moods. The staff is briefed, the tables are set, and the champagne is chilled. He descended the stairs, not looking at her, but at the cavernous hall, his eyes scanning for imperfections. Good. Remember to steer clear of Victoria Carrington. The woman's a shark, and I don't want you saying something, naive. Letitia's jaw tightened. Naive. It was his favorite word for her, a verbal pat on the head to remind her of her place. I know how to conduct myself, Richard. He finally looked at her, his gaze sweeping over her simple but elegant navy blue gown. He frowned slightly. Is that what you're wearing? It's a bit understated, isn't it? It's a classic, Richard. Understated is elegant. Understated is forgettable, he retorted, before turning his attention to a fresh wave of anxiety. Is the driveway clear? The valet service better be on point. I don't want a bottleneck. He walked away without another word, leaving her standing in the center of the hall. He considered his in the middle of a party. He considered his. She was just another fixture, another part of the decor he had acquired. She smoothed down her dress and took a deep, steadying breath. Lily and Leo were with their favorite sitter, Maria, tucked away in the family wing of the mansion, shielded from this parade of vanity. That was Letitia's one non-negotiable term for the evening. Her children would not be props in their father's theatre. The guests began to arrive, a river of silk diamonds and artificial laughter. They were the titans of industry, the doyens of society, the people whose names were whispered with reverence in the financial pages. Letitia played her part with practiced grace. She smiled, she shook hands. She inquired about children she'd never met, and summer homes she'd never see. She was the perfect hostess, a phantom moving through the crowd, ensuring everyone's glass was full and everyone's ego was stroked. Richard was in his element. He stood near the massive stone fireplace, a glass of scotch in his hand, holding court. His voice, rich and confident, cut through the din. Letitia watched him from across the room. He was handsome, she couldn't deny it. But the charm that had once captivated her now seemed reptilian, a skin he shed when they were alone. Later in the evening, as the orchestra played a soft melody, Letitia was checking on the dessert course in the kitchens when she overheard a snippet of conversation from the adjoining hallway. It was Victoria Carrington, a woman sculpted from ambition and disdain, her voice a venomous whisper. "Can't believe Richard Hayes is still with her. She's so plain. She has the air of a country mouse who stumbled into the palace." Another woman, whose name Letitia couldn't place, giggled. "I heard she was a nobody before him. He plucked her from obscurity. Honestly, she looks more like the children's governess than the lady of the house." The words were like tiny shards of ice in her veins. She had heard whispers like this before, but they had never been so close, so clear. She leaned against the cool kitchen wall, the clatter of pots and pans, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside her. She had given up her dreams, her career path in archival sciences, her very identity to support his. And for what? To be the subject of cruel jokes. She composed herself and walked back into the ballroom, her head held high. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. She spotted Richard in a tight circle with a group of potential investors, including the notoriously difficult billionaire Marcus Thorne. Thorne was known for being old-fashioned, a man who valued family and stability. Letitia knew Richard was desperate to secure a deal with him. She approached the group intending to offer them a fresh round of drinks, to play the part of the attentive wife. As she drew near, she saw Victoria Carrington slink up to the group, a champagne flute in her hand. "Richard, darling." Victoria purred, placing a hand on his arm that lingered a moment too long. "Everything is just divine. You truly are the king of this castle." She then turned her sharp eyes to Letitia, who was now standing at the edge of the circle. Victoria's smile was a predatory slash of red lipstick. She looked Letitia up and down, then turned back to Marcus Thorne. "And you've met everyone, haven't you?" Marcus Thorne, a portly man with kind eyes, gave Letitia a polite smile. "I've had the pleasure of meeting Mrs. Hayes, yes. A delightful woman." Richard, basking in the praise and eager to maintain his alpha status in the group, made a fatal dismissive gesture in Letitia's direction. He chuckled a sound meant to be charmingly self-deprecating, but that landed with the force of a slap. "Oh, Letitia," he said, his eyes not even meeting hers. The entire circle turned to look at her. The music seemed to fade away. The world narrowed to that single, horrifying moment. Don't mind her, she's a warrior. Keeps the whole operation running smoothly. Think of her as the executive nanny. He then made it worse. As a new couple approached, the woman asked, pointing to Letitia, "Is that your wife, Richard?" "I don't believe we've been introduced." Richard, high on his own importance and the fawning of his guests, delivered the final devastating blow. He waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, her," he said with a laugh loud enough for everyone to hear. "She's just the nanny." A collective awkward titter went through the group. Victoria Carrington's eyes gleamed with triumph. Marcus Thorne's polite smile faltered, replaced by a look of deep discomfort. For a few seconds, there was a terrible ringing silence, where the only sound was the fizzing of champagne bubbles. Letitia stood frozen. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was a public execution of her identity. Every sacrifice she had made, every lonely night she had endured, every condescending comment, she had swallowed it all, coalesced into a single point of unbearable pressure. He hadn't just insulted her, he had erased her. In his world, in this house, she was nothing more than the help. Something inside her, something that had been dormant for a very long time, snapped. The hurt, white-hot and searing, was there. But beneath it, a different feeling began to surface. It was a cold, clear, and unyielding rage. It wasn't the fiery, explosive anger of a tantrum, but the deep, tectonic fury of a woman who had finally been pushed too far. She didn't storm off. She didn't cry. She held Richard's gaze for a brief, searing moment, her eyes conveying a message he was too arrogant to read. Then she gave the group a smile so serene, so utterly detached it was more chilling than any scream. "If you'll excuse me," she said, her voice impossibly steady, "I must go check on the children." She turned and walked away, her back straight, her steps measured. She wasn't just walking out of the room. She was walking out of the life Richard had built for her. As she ascended the grand staircase, leaving the party and her husband behind, she wasn't thinking about the catering or the guests or the whispers. She was thinking about a locked drawer in her hobby room. She was thinking about a thick manila folder. And she was thinking about the name of the man who had truly seen her worth, Mr. Alistair Blackwood, the original owner of the mansion, the man who had left her a secret weapon, a final, beautiful checkmate in a game she hadn't even realized she was playing. The deed to Blackwood Manor was in her name, and Richard was about to find out what it truly meant to be a guest in her home. Letitia did not go to the children's wing. Lily and Leo were safe and sound, with Maria lost in the worlds of bedtime stories and dreams. Instead, she went to her small office, the room Richard had so generously allowed her to have. She closed the heavy oak door, the click of the lock sounding like the first turn of a key in the engine of her new life. The faint sounds of the orchestra below were a world away. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with adrenaline. Just the nanny. The words echoed in the sudden, profound silence of the room. For years she had accepted his narrative that he had saved her, that her life was a gift from him. She had believed that the price of this gilded cage was her voice. Tonight she realized the price was her soul, and she was no longer willing to pay. She knelt and unlocked the bottom drawer of her antique writing desk, a piece she'd bought herself with a small inheritance from her grandmother, one of the few things in the house that was truly hers. Tucked beneath a stack of old art history textbooks was the manila folder. It was worn at the edges, the paper soft with age. Her name, Letitia Vance, her maiden name was written on the tab in faint, spidery handwriting, not her own. Inside was a collection of documents, but she bypassed them all, her fingers searching for the main one. It was a thick vellum document, stiff and important. The official deed to the property known as 100 Blackwood Lane, including the manor house and all 250 acres of surrounding land. And there, under the section marked Owner, was her name printed in stark, irrefutable black ink, Letitia Marie Vance. Beneath the deed was a sealed envelope addressed to her in the same elegant, shaky script. She had read it only once on the day it was given to her, and had found the content so overwhelming, so bittersweet, that she had sealed it away, almost afraid of its implications. Tonight, she needed to read it again. She needed to remember. Her mind drifted back 12 years, to a time before Richard. A time when she was just Letitia Vance, a bright but financially struggling graduate student. To pay her way through Columbia, she had taken a job as a companion and archivist for a reclusive and fabulously wealthy old man, Alistair Blackwood. Alistair was the last of his line, a widower with no children living out his final years in the very same mansion she now called home. He was cantankerous, brilliant, and deeply lonely. The world saw him as an eccentric hermit, but Letitia saw a man with a profound love for history, art, and quiet integrity. He hired her to organize his massive personal library, a task that was more a ruse to have company than a genuine need for an archivist. They spent hundreds of hours together in the dusty, sun-drenched library of Blackwood Manor. He would tell her stories of his life, of the changing world of the paintings that adorned his walls. He taught her about finance, not the predatory kind Richard practiced, but the patient, value-driven investing of a bygone era. He listened to her dreams of becoming a museum curator. He more than anyone saw the sharp, inquisitive mind beneath her quiet exterior. The world is full of noisy men, Letitia, he had told her, one afternoon, his voice a gravelly whisper as he looked out over his estate. Men who mistake volume for value. They build empires on sand and call them fortresses. The trick is to have your foundation on solid rock and to build it so quietly they don't even know it's there until the storm comes. When Alistair's health began to fail, Letitia became his primary caregiver, a role she undertook with genuine affection. It was during this time she met Richard, who was a junior associate at the firm that managed a small part of Alistair's vast estate. Richard was charming, attentive, and deeply impressed by her proximity to such immense wealth. Looking back, Letitia could see the first red flags. His questions were always about Alistair's net worth, about the value of the art, about the estate. At the time, blinded by what she thought was love, she saw it as ambition. Alistair saw it for what it was. He looks at this house the way a wolf looks at a sheep. Alistair had warned her, his hand frail on hers. Be careful, my dear. Men like that don't acquire things, they consume them. And they consume people, too. She had defended Richard, assuring Alistair he was different. Alistair had simply patted her hand and said, I hope you are right. But hope is not a strategy. One must always have a fortress. Alistair Blackwood passed away peacefully a few months later. In his will, he left a generous but not extravagant sum to Letitia, enough to finish her studies and live comfortably. The bulk of his fortune went to establishing a new wing at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The house and its contents were to be sold, the proceeds funding the donation. What Letitia didn't know, what no one knew, except for Alistair's most trusted lawyer, a quiet man named Samuel Davies, was that there was a secret addendum to the will, a codicil. Letitia opened the letter in her office. Alistair's words seemed to lift from the page, his voice echoing in her memory. My dearest Letitia, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are likely feeling a little lost. I am writing to you because you were the only person in my final years who saw a man, not a bank vault. You shared your intellect, your kindness, and your time, none of which had a price tag, and all of which were invaluable. I have left you a sum in my public will, but I have also made a private provision. I worry about you, my dear. You have a good heart, which in this world can be a liability. That young man, Richard Hayes, has the scent of ambition on him, and it is a scent that often sours into avarice. He wants this house, I know. He speaks of it as if it were his birthright. And perhaps one day he will have the means to acquire it. Which is why I have made a rather unusual arrangement. I have instructed my lawyer, Mr. Davies, to use a separate private trust to purchase Blackwood Manor anonymously when it goes on the market. He will then be instructed to sign the deed over to you, Letitia Vance. The house is yours. It was always meant for someone who appreciated its soul, not its square footage. Let Richard believe he is the king. Let him build his empire of sand within these stone walls. This house, this land, this foundation of rock, it is your fortress. Should the day ever come that you need to remind him and the world who you are, this deed will be your voice. Do not use it out of spite, but out of necessity. Use it to protect yourself and your future. Use it to be free. You are not naive, Letitia. You are kind. Do not let anyone convince you they are the same thing. Yours in memory, Alistair Blackwood. Tears streamed down Letitia's face, not of sadness, but of profound, gut-wrenching gratitude. Alistair had seen it all. He had predicted the storm. He hadn't just given her a house. He had given her a lifeline, a secret power held in reserve for the exact moment she would need it most. For 10 years she had lived in this house, as a guest deferring to Richard in every decision. When he had proudly announced 6 years ago that he'd finally scraped together the capital through loans and leveraged deals to buy Blackwood Manor, his ultimate trophy, she had played the part of the surprised and delighted wife. She had watched as he signed what he believed to be mortgage documents and purchase agreements, all expertly orchestrated by the discreet Mr. Davies, who had ensured Richard's funds were funneled into a holding company that then sold him the house. In reality, Richard had been paying off a private loan to a trust that Alistair had set up, a trust that Letitia now controlled. He hadn't been building equity. He had been paying rent. The sheer brilliant audacity of Alistair's plan was staggering. He had given Richard the illusion of ownership, knowing his ego would never let him scrutinize the details too closely. Letitia wiped her tears, a new resolve hardening her features. The time for quiet acceptance was over. Alistair had given her a fortress, and tonight Richard had laid siege to it. She pulled out her phone and found the number for Samuel Davies, Alistair's lawyer, which she had saved all those years ago. It was well past midnight, but the card he had given her said, "Call any time, day or night." The phone rang twice before a calm, elderly voice answered. "Davies. Mr. Davies." Letitia said, her voice shaking slightly but clear. "This is Letitia Hayes. Letitia Vance." There was a pause on the other end, and then a gentle understanding. "Mrs. Hayes. I must confess I have been wondering if I would ever receive this call. Is everything all right?" "No," Letitia said, looking at the deed on her desk. "No, it is not. But it's about to be." She took a deep breath. Mr. Blackwood mentioned a storm. I believe the first rains have begun. I see Davies replied, his voice calm and reassuring. His instructions in that event were very clear. The first step is to secure you independent counsel, someone of our choosing, not your husband's. She is the best. Her name is Evelyn Reed. I will have her contact you first thing in the morning. Do nothing until you speak with her. And the second step, Letitia asked. The second step, Davies said, with a hint of satisfaction in his voice, is to let the storm break. When Letitia finally went to bed, Richard was passed out, smelling of expensive scotch and self-satisfaction. He hadn't even noticed her absence. She lay beside him in the dark, staring at the ceiling, the legal document a phantom brand on her mind. She was no longer Letitia Hayes, the timid wife. She was Letitia Vance, the rightful owner of Blackwood Manor, and the man sleeping beside her was nothing more than a tenant. An eviction notice was long overdue. The morning after the gala, the atmosphere in Blackwood Manor was thick with unspoken tension. Richard nursed a hangover with black coffee and a foul temper, complaining about the subpar performance of the valet service and the tepid applause for his speech. He made no mention of the nanny comment, treating it as if it had never happened, his standard procedure for any transgression. To acknowledge it would be to admit fault. Letitia, however, was a different woman. The deference was gone, replaced by a quiet, unnerving calm. She served the children their breakfast, her movements precise and deliberate. When Richard barked at her to have his suit for the day pressed, she simply replied, "The staff can handle that," without looking up from buttering Leo's toast. Richard paused his coffee cup halfway to his lips. He wasn't used to this tone. It wasn't defiant. It was dismissive. "What's gotten into you this morning?" he grumbled. "I'm just busy, Richard," she said, finally meeting his gaze. Her eyes were clear and steady, and for the first time he seemed to see a stranger looking back at him. He was momentarily taken aback, but quickly chalked it up to post-party fatigue. At precisely 9:00 a.m., Letitia's phone buzzed, a restricted number. She excused herself and took the call in her office, locking the door behind her. "Is this Letitia Hayes?" The voice was female, crisp and professional. "Yes, this is she. My name is Evelyn Reed. I'm an attorney. Samuel Davies asked me to reach out to you. He suggested you might require legal counsel." Letitia felt a wave of relief. "Yes. Thank you for calling. Mr. Davies has already forwarded me the relevant documents pertaining to the Blackwood Trust and the deed to your property. I've reviewed them. It is, if you'll permit me to say so, one of the most brilliantly executed estate plans I have ever seen." Evelyn Reed said, a note of admiration in her voice. "You are in an exceptionally strong position, Mrs. Hayes. The question is, what do you want to do with it?" Letitia looked out the window at the rolling lawns of the estate. "I want him out," she said the words, tasting of freedom. "I want a divorce. I want to protect my children and secure my future. A future that doesn't involve him." "Very well," Evelyn replied. "Then we proceed with a strategy of leverage. We don't show our hand until the perfect moment. Does your husband have any pressing financial matters at the moment? Any venture that makes him particularly vulnerable?" Letitia's mind immediately went to the deal with Marcus Thorne, the billionaire from the party. Richard had been obsessed with it for months. It was a massive international real estate development project that required enormous upfront capital. Richard's firm was over-leveraged, and he was personally guaranteeing a significant portion of the loan. "He's trying to close a deal," Letitia explained. "He needs to secure a bridge loan of over $50 million. He's been bragging that the only reason the bank is even considering it is because he's using the house as collateral. He calls it his rock-solid asset. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, followed by what sounded suspiciously like a suppressed chuckle. "Oh, that is perfect," Evelyn said. "Truly perfect. He's trying to borrow against an asset he doesn't own. That's bank fraud, Mrs. Hayes." The word hit Letitia with force. Fraud. This was more serious than she had imagined. "What do we do?" she asked. "We do nothing. We wait for him to make his move. The bank will conduct its own title search as part of their due diligence. When they do, the name they find will not be Richard Hayes. Let the bank discover the truth for us. In the meantime, you live your life. Do not engage. Do not argue. Be polite. Be distant. And let him unravel on his own." Over the next 2 weeks, Letitia followed Evelyn's advice. She existed in the house like a ghost, a polite stranger who shared a roof with Richard. The change was palpable. She stopped managing his social calendar. She stopped reminding him of his appointments. She focused solely on the children, taking them on long walks through the woods on the estate, telling them stories about the trees and the land stories Alistair had once told her. Richard predictably grew increasingly agitated. His world, which had always revolved around his needs, was suddenly off-kilter. "Why didn't you remind me about my dinner with the board?" he'd snap. "That's your calendar, Richard," she'd reply calmly. "The house is a mess. Why haven't you spoken to the staff?" "They are your employees as much as mine." His frustration culminated one evening when he came home in a state of high anxiety. The deal with Marcus Thorne was hitting a snag. "The bank is dragging its feet on the loan," he vented, pacing the library. "They're asking for endless paperwork. Appraisals, inspections, title searches. It's infuriating. It's Blackwood. Manor, for God's sake. It's as blue chip as it gets." Letitia felt a cold thrill. It was happening. "I'm sure it will all work out," she said, her voice a placid lake he could not see beneath. His anger then turned on her. "You know this is partly your fault. My head isn't in the game. This coldness from you, it's distracting. What is it you want, Letitia?" "A new car. More jewelry. Just tell me the price so we can go back to normal." It was the most honest thing he had ever said. He truly believed her affection and her very being could be purchased. "There is no price, Richard," she said softly. "There is no back to normal." His frustration boiled over into a visit from his mother, Beatrice Hayes, a woman made of iron and judgment. Beatrice had never approved of Letitia seeing her as a commoner who had trapped her brilliant son. She arrived unannounced, her presence sucking the warmth from the room. Beatrice cornered Letitia in the morning room, her eyes like chips of granite. "I don't know what games you are playing." "Young lady," she began dispensing with pleasantries. "But Richard is under an immense amount of pressure. A man in his position needs a supportive wife, not a petulant child giving him the silent treatment. Whatever this is about, you need to end it. You owe him everything. Don't you ever forget that. The Letitia of a month ago would have withered under this assault." The new Letitia simply sipped her tea. "Thank you for your concern, Beatrice," she said, setting her cup down with a delicate clink. "But my marriage is a matter for my husband and me to discuss." "Your marriage?" Beatrice scoffed. "You have a lifestyle, my dear, a very, very expensive lifestyle paid for by my son's sweat and genius. Don't get confused and start thinking you have a say in how he runs his life. Letitia stood up, her full height matching the older woman's. "I think you'll find," she said, her voice low and clear, "that I have a say in a great many things." She looked around this Hewland room at the priceless antiques and silk wallpaper, especially when it comes to this house. Beatrice was left speechless, an unfamiliar and infuriating state for her. The breaking point came a week later. Richard burst into the house, his face a mask of triumphant relief. "It's done," he announced, throwing his briefcase onto a chair. "The bank is finally ready to move. They've scheduled the final appraisal and the signing for tomorrow. They're sending their senior VP, along with Marcus Thorne's own financial advisor, just to make everything official. They want to see the property one last time before they release the funds." He grabbed Letitia by the shoulders, his eyes gleaming with a manic energy. "This is it, Letitia. This deal will catapult us into the stratosphere. Tomorrow, you will play the part of the happy, supportive wife. You will smile, you will be charming, and you will not say one word out of place. Is that clear?" Letitia looked into his eyes and saw no love, no partnership. Only a desperate man using her as a prop one last time. "Perfectly clear," she said. That night, she called Evelyn Reed. "It's tomorrow," Letitia said. "He's bringing the bankers and investors here." "Excellent," Evelyn replied, her voice charged with energy. "The title search would have been completed this afternoon. The bank knows. They are coming tomorrow not to sign a deal, but to witness a showdown. They want to see who they are really dealing with, so we will give them one. What do I do tomorrow at the appointed time I will arrive at the house? You will let me in. And then, Mrs. Hayes, we will let the storm break." The next day dawned bright and clear, a perfect autumn morning that was cruelly at odds with the tempest brewing inside Blackwood Manor. Richard was a whirlwind of nervous energy, barking orders at the staff and changing his tie 3 times. He wanted the house to look like a fortress of wealth and stability, a physical manifestation of his own success. "Letitia, make sure there are fresh flowers in the great hall," he commanded. "And for God's sake, put on that diamond necklace I bought you. Look the part." Letitia moved through the morning in a state of surreal calm. She dressed not in the flashy jewelry Richard demanded, but in a simple, elegant cashmere dress in a shade of deep forest green. It was a color Alistair had always said brought out the intelligence in her eyes. She felt armored in it. At 2 o'clock, 2 black sedans crunched up the gravel driveway. Richard rushed out to greet them, his face stretched into a painful-looking smile. Out stepped Marcus Thorne's impeccably dressed advisor, a woman named Ms. Albright, and 2 grim-faced senior bankers, a Mr. Henderson and a Mr. Cole. Richard ushered them inside, his voice a booming symphony of false bonhomie. "Welcome, welcome, welcome to my home," he declared, sweeping his arm wide to encompass the majestic great hall. "As you can see, a foundation of solid rock." Letitia watched from the top of the stairs. Henderson and Cole exchanged a brief, almost imperceptible glance. They knew. An impressive property, Mr. Hayes, Ms. Albright said, her tone neutral. "Truly magnificent," Richard preened. "Please call me Richard. Let me give you the grand tour before we sit down to sign the final papers. Every inch of this place tells a story." As Richard began his pompous tour pointing out paintings he couldn't name and architectural features he didn't understand, Letitia descended the staircase. Her footsteps were silent, but her presence was immediately felt. The bankers and Ms. Albright turned to her, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and anticipation. Richard, annoyed by the interruption, shot her a look of pure fury. He tried to brush it off with a laugh. Ah, here's my wife, Letitia, always making sure things are running smoothly. He turned to her, his voice a low, threatening hiss meant only for her. Go see to the refreshments. Letitia ignored him. She walked directly to the group and extended a hand to Miss Albright. It's a pleasure to see you again, Miss Albright. Mr. Henderson. Mr. Cole, I'm Letitia Hayes. Thank you for coming. The men shook her hand, their grips firm and respectful. The power dynamic in the room had subtly shifted. Actually, Richard Letitia said, her voice clear and strong, resonating in the cavernous hall. Before you continue the tour of my house, I believe there's another guest arriving. As if on cue, the heavy oak door opened. A woman stood there, poised and confident, carrying a leather briefcase. She was in her late 40s, with sharp eyes and an air of absolute authority. Evelyn Reed, she announced, stepping inside. I'm counsel for the owner of this property. Richard stared, his face a comical mask of confusion. Owner. I'm the owner. Who the hell are you? I'm Miss Reed, Evelyn said, walking calmly to stand beside Letitia. And I am here on behalf of my client, Letitia Vance. The name, her maiden name, hung in the air. Richard let out a short, incredulous laugh. Vance? What is this, some kind of joke, Letitia? What did you do? What I should have done years ago. Richard Letitia said, her gaze unwavering. I decided to tell the truth. Mr. Henderson, the senior banker, cleared his throat. Mr. Hayes, he said, his voice cold and official. We ran the title search on 100 Blackwood Lane yesterday as a final part of our due diligence for the $50 million loan you applied for, which you intended to secure with this property as collateral. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The property is not in your name. It is and has been for the last 6 years in the sole name of one Letitia Marie Vance. It is unencumbered by any mortgage. Richard's face went white. The blood drained from it so fast he seemed to shrink before their eyes. That's impossible. It's a clerical error. A mistake, he sputtered, turning on Letitia. What have you done? Did you forge something? This is insane, Evelyn. Reed stepped forward and opened her briefcase. She took out a single vellum document. It was a certified copy of the deed. There is no mistake, Mr. Hayes. Evelyn said, her voice cutting through his panic. My client, Letitia Vance, is the legal and sole owner of Blackwood Manor. The funds you used to purchase the property 6 years ago were directed into a trust she controls as per the explicit instructions of the estate of the previous owner, Mr. Alistair Blackwood. For the past 6 years, you haven't been paying a mortgage. You've been paying rent. She laid the deed on a nearby mahogany table. The black ink of Letitia's name seemed to scream from the page. Richard stared at it, his breathing ragged. He looked from the deed to Letitia, his eyes wild with disbelief and a dawning, horrifying understanding. The silence, the distance, the strange calm, it all clicked into place. This was a coup. You, he stammered, unable to form a coherent sentence. Ms. Albright, Marcus Thorne's advisor, spoke up, her voice devoid of any warmth. Mr. Hayes attempting to secure a $50 million loan against an asset you do not own constitutes bank fraud. Marcus Thorne has built his reputation on integrity and sound business dealings. We will, of course, be withdrawing from the development project immediately. Our relationship is terminated. Mr. Henderson nodded. As is your line of credit with our institution. We'll be calling in all your outstanding loans. I expect our legal team will be in touch by the end of the day." The entire edifice of Richard's life, his career, his reputation, his self-worth, crumbled to dust in the space of 30 seconds. He had lost the deal, lost his bank, and was facing financial ruin and possible criminal charges. He finally turned his full venomous rage on Letitia. "You scheming, backstabbing bitch!" he snarled, taking a step toward her. "After everything I gave you, I took you from nothing. You gave me nothing," Letitia replied, her voice ringing with a power no one in that room had ever heard from her before. "Everything I have, I earned. This house was a gift, a kindness from a man who saw my worth when you only saw an accessory. You didn't take me from nothing, Richard. You tried to turn me into nothing. You stood in this very hall 2 weeks ago and called me just the nanny in front of your friends." She took a step forward, closing the distance between them. "Well, the nanny owns the house. The nanny owns the land your feet are standing on. And the nanny is telling you your lease is terminated." The bankers and Miss Albright, having witnessed the complete detonation, quietly saw themselves out. This was a family matter now, and their business was concluded. Evelyn Reed remained a silent, powerful guardian at Letitia's side. Richard stared at her, his face a twisted wreck of fury and humiliation. The king was deposed. The castle was not his. He was no longer the master of the universe. He was just a man standing in his ex-wife's hallway, about to be homeless. The moment the great oak door closed behind the bankers, the last vestiges of Richard's composure shattered. His face contorted into a mask of pure rage. "You will not get away with this!" He roared, his voice echoing unnaturally in the suddenly silent hall. He lunged, not at Letitia, but at the mahogany table, grabbing the copy of the deed and ripping it in two. "This means nothing. This house is mine. I paid for it. Evelyn." Reed didn't flinch. "Tearing up a copy changes nothing, Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice as sharp and cool as ice. "The original is in a bank vault. And as for what you paid, my client is willing to consider it rent for the 6 years you've enjoyed living in her property. A property, I might add, that you have allowed to fall into some disrepair, which we will be factoring into our divorce settlement." "Divorce," he spat the word as if it were poison. "You think I'm just going to walk away from my life, from my children?" This was the moment Letitia had dreaded and prepared for. "They are my children, Richard," she said, her voice firm, cutting through his tirade. "And they will be staying here in their home, with me." "You will not take my children," he bellowed, his eyes wild. Evelyn stepped forward, her presence commanding. "I would advise you to think very carefully about your next words, Mr. Hayes. My client is being exceptionally generous. She could press charges for felony bank fraud. She could sue you for the emotional distress and public humiliation you have subjected her to for years. She could expose your precarious financial dealings, and we have a very clear picture of them to every major news outlet in the country. Your reputation would be so toxic you couldn't get a loan for a cup of coffee." She let the threats hang in the air. "Or," she continued, her voice softening slightly, "you could accept the terms of the separation agreement we have drafted. You will walk away with your personal belongings and a gag order, promising never to contest the custody of the children or speak ill of their mother. In return, she will not press charges and will not pursue you for the millions you technically owe her. You will be free to go and attempt to salvage what's left of your pathetic career. The choice is yours. A quiet, humiliating exit or total annihilation. Richard stared at her, then at Letitia. He saw no weakness, no hesitation. He saw two women who had him utterly and completely cornered. The fight drained out of him, replaced by the hollow, bitter certainty of defeat. He was a predator who had been outmaneuvered, and he knew it. He let the torn pieces of the deed flutter from his fingers to the floor. Without another word, he turned and stormed up the grand staircase. The sounds of doors slamming and drawers being wrenched open echoed through the house. Over the next few hours, Richard packed. Letitia and Evelyn sat in the library, sipping tea as he dismantled his life. He took his expensive suits, his gaudy watches, his self-congratulatory awards. When he came down the stairs carrying 2 suitcases and a garment bag, he looked like a diminished man. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a sullen, deep-seated resentment. He paused at the door and looked at Letitia one last time. "I hope you're happy," he sneered, "alone in this big empty house." "It's not empty, Richard," Letitia said softly, thinking of Lily and Leo upstairs, safe and unaware. "It was only empty when you were here." He left the closing of the door final and absolute. The silence he left behind was not empty. It was peaceful. In the days that followed, Letitia began to reclaim the house. She had the locks changed. She hired her own staff people who looked at her with respect, not pity. She started packing Richard's remaining things, the ugly modern art he favored, his oversized leather furniture, into boxes for storage. She walked through the rooms and for the first time felt the comforting embrace of home. She sat down with Lily and Leo and explained in simple, age-appropriate terms that their father would be living somewhere else for a while, but that he loved them, and this would always be their home. Lily, who at 10 was more perceptive than Letitia, gave her credit for simply hugged her mother. "It's okay, Mum," she whispered. "He was always so loud." One afternoon, while clearing out the hobby room to turn it into a proper study for herself, she found the original manila folder. Tucked in the very back was another smaller envelope she'd never seen before. It was also in Alistair's hand, marked, "For when the storm has passed." She opened it. "My dearest Letitia, if you are reading this, it means you found your voice. It means you unleashed the strength I always knew you possessed. I am proud of you." The house was never a weapon. It was a key to a door behind which your true life was waiting. Don't live in my house, my dear. Make it your own. Fill it with laughter, with art that you love, with children and friends. Let it be a sanctuary, not a fortress. The world is full of noisy men, but you have proven that the quietest voices often have the most important things to say. Your future is an unwritten book. Go fill the pages. Yours, Alistair. Tears welled in Letitia's eyes as she read the letter. She looked out the window at the ancient oak tree on the lawn that Alistair had loved so much. The gilded cage was gone. The bars had melted away. She was standing in her own home, the mistress of her own destiny. She was not Richard Hayes's wife, and she was certainly not just the nanny. She was Letitia Vance, and she was finally, completely, gloriously free. In the end, the grand mansion wasn't the prize. The real victory was Letitia's reclamation of herself. She proved that true power isn't about wealth or status, but about the quiet strength that lies within us, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Richard Hayes built his world on a foundation of arrogance and illusion, and it took just one piece of paper, one moment of courage to bring it all down. Letitia didn't just evict a cheating husband. She evicted the fear and self-doubt he had instilled in her for a decade. She is a reminder that your worth is never determined by how others see you, but by how you see yourself. If this story of resilience and empowerment resonated with you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who might need a reminder of their own inner strength. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas and tales of justice. What did you think of Letitia's final move? Let us know in the comments below.